From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
U.S. fighter jets shoot down a Chinese surveillance balloon on President Biden's orders a week after it entered U.S. airspace. What took so long for the shoot down, and what are the implications for U.S.-China relations and for U.S. defenses? Plus, the Democratic National Committee shakes up the Democratic Party's 2024 primary calendar, putting South Carolina first and demoting New Hampshire and Iowa. What's behind the move that ends 50 years of tradition? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and I'm here with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Kate Odell. Let's talk first about the Chinese balloon, which dominated the weekend news. And here's how President Biden explained his decision to shoot it down on Saturday.
On Wednesday, when I was briefed on the balloon, I ordered the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible. They decided, without doing damage to anyone on the ground, they decided that the best time to do that was as it got over water outside within the 12-mile limit. They successfully took it down, and I want to compliment our aviators who did it, and we'll have more to report on this a little later. Thank you.
You were saying the recommendation was from your national security.
I told them to shoot it down.
On Wednesday.
On Wednesday.
But the recommendation
They said to me, let's wait till the safest place to do it.
Well, not much information there, and there hasn't been much information since from the administration statement from the Pentagon, some whispering to the press, kind of a victory lap. They talked to David Ignatius, the Washington Post. It was all an act of strategic genius on the part of the administration, that talking to Mr. Ignatius. Here's how Republican Congressman Mike Turner responded to all this on Meet the Press.
Clearly, the president taking it down over the Atlantic is sort of like the quarterback, sort of like tackling the quarterback after the game is over. The satellite had completed its mission. This should never have been allowed to enter the United States, and it never should have been allowed to complete its mission. If you ask somebody to draw an X at every place where our sensitive missile defense sites, our nuclear weapons infrastructure, our nuclear weapons sites are, you would put them all along this path. Clearly, this was an attempt by China to gather information to defeat our command and control of our sensitive missile defense and nuclear weapons sites. And that certainly is an urgency that this administration does not recognize.
Well, Kate, a lot of questions to get answers to that the administration is not responding to so far. First is, what's the exact timeline here? When did the administration first know about the balloon entering U.S. airspace? Then why the delay in taking it on? And the official explanation is, well, they were worried about debris. But of course, Alaska is a big state. There's a lot of space there to fall without hitting people. And you have to ask the question, well, why couldn't they take it out over Alaska? Did they even know it was there? Of course, after it went through Alaska, it went on through Canada and then down into Montana and across the U.S. Any other things you'd like to know, Kate?
Yeah. So to your point, there's some real problems with that narrative that we just heard. So we know that as early as January 28th is when it starts to appear near the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. And to your point about Canada, it was known to be passing over Canada. So does Canada allow their sovereign airspace to be violated by Chinese balloons? It is odd that there's no action taken then until it turns up in Montana and Americans start seeing it in Billings, Montana.
Civilians, right, Kate?
Civilians, correct. Yeah. Yes, right. And then we hear about it. So that's a problem with that timeline. Also, Paul, this idea that they were just playing it close to the vest and always planning to take it down also has some holes in it, because the Pentagon was briefing last week. We're specifically asked, are you planning to take it down once it gets over the Atlantic? And they wouldn't say anything on that front. And so this idea that what it looks like is that they only shot it down, and it became politically untenable not to do so. Another explanation I don't buy is that Biden merely deferred to the military on what to do. Biden, for instance, the military had a lot to say about the withdrawal from Afghanistan that Biden had no problem overruling. Biden opposed the Osama bin Laden raid. This idea that he simply couldn't do something different from his military commander's advice is very odd to me. Their job is to brief, the risks of the operation, and President Biden has to consider other factors, like what message will it send to China if we allow it to float across the United States unperturbed. Those are just a few of those problems I see with this victory lap that they're taking now, which just makes us look pretty weak and impotent that we let it get all the way across.
Kim, the timing of this from China's point of view also certainly notable notable and strange given that Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was set this week to visit China on a much anticipated trip, the goal of which was to put U.S.-China relations on a less contentious footing, try to reset the relationship, see if there's a modus vivendi that we could get to with China. And this follows up on the meeting in Bali that President Biden had with President Xi Jinping. So this had a lot of promise and importance as a meeting. And of course, this balloon episode has now blown it up. That meeting, Blinken canceled. We don't know when it'll be reset. I suspect it will be, but it can't be anytime soon because the criticism of the administration would be enormous after this provocation. So I don't know. What do you make of the timing here? And was the administration right to cancel, or should they have done more?
Well, it does raise the question as to whether or not China did this deliberately, even maybe to potentially scuttle that visit because they don't want a reset. There's also the possibility that they were sending it out almost as a literal trial balloon to see what Biden would do in this situation to potentially make him look weak. That is something that our adversaries like to do. They try to poke at the edges and expose you when you're soft. I think one of the things that undermines maybe both of those arguments is that we now are getting reporting, including in the Wall Street Journal, but other outlets too, that this isn't the first time. According to unnamed people in the administration, they now say that this is the fifth time that China has sent a balloon over us, that 3 times it happened under Donald Trump, once earlier in the Biden administration. This person even went so far as to say that China has an entire fleet of these surveillance balloons, which have been deployed over Europe and Asia and Latin America. And indeed, China recently admitted that there is a second balloon right now over Latin America. This all raises the question, in my mind, if they've been doing this for a long time, and I'm still not entirely sure how the United States has now, after the fact, pieced together that these balloons came across because they said that they were undetected the first time they came across. And I don't question what kind of technology we have to allow to recreate that scenario. But it does raise the question, if this did happen this many times in the past, why on earth do we not have a plan on how we were going to take it down if they did it again, which one would assume that they would, given that this was a repeat occurrence? The United States was clearly right to call this off. But I think the bigger question is, I would like to know when we talk to China about this, what their answer was to us. Did they lie to us, our diplomats, as well as in public about its purpose? Because that should also bring with it some ramifications in terms of our ongoing relationship.
The story about the previous flights of Chinese surveillance balloons across North American U.S. airspace is, let's just say, it needs a few holes to be filled in. Because the first iteration of this story was that, Biden administration now saying, well, see, we weren't the only ones. This happened during Trump, which looks to have been an attempt to muddy up the political responsibility in here. See, this is not unusual. No particular responsibility that we have for this has happened before. But then you have former Trump officials saying, well, we never heard anything about that. I mean, John Bolton said that. I think Robert O'Brien said that. Former National Security Advisor used, well, why didn't they? Well, did the Pentagon withhold the information, or did we not detect it? And then you have the Biden administration saying, well, we're happy to brief you on this. Well, very nice of you to do that after you've said we should have known all of this. It's very fishy, and we have to get to the bottom of this, not least for the point that Kim makes, which is if we haven't detected these, well, wow, that's a big hole in our airspace defenses. I mean, you can look at these airships and you say, well, there's not a threat. The truth is, they could be. I mean, you could drop a weapon from a balloon like that, and it could perhaps have an electromagnetic pulse effect that does enormous harm to the electrical grid. Who knows what else you could do from something like that?
Yeah, and keep in mind, when the Pentagon initially started telling the public about this, they mentioned sort of offhand that there had been other instances of this activity, including in the previous administration, but said this instance is different because the balloon is loitering longer and is really over the continental United States. There have been some kind of mysterious episodes over Hawaii and Guam, for instance, but by their own report, they want it both ways. They want to say this is no big deal because it happened before, but also it has unique features that made it more of a risk that we had to take action. So again, that's really a muddying the waters to evade political accountability for delaying the decision to shoot down the balloon and for allowing several days to go by as it floated through Canada and over into Montana before doing anything. And again, looking as though you're only telling the public about it once you're forced to because civilians see it in the sky. So I think what we're heading for here is some hearings in Congress that try to get some clarity on exactly what the Biden administration knew and when, because that would be helpful to understand, to get this timeline and to get some understanding of when they understood that there were instances in the Trump administration or how those are different from this case. As for now, we don't know any of that, which is troubling.